Right.
So let's go ahead and let's jump to this next clip where she kind of then moves to the New Testament and is going to talk a little bit about Gehenna. So let's talk about that.
And that was when he was speaking to the apostles and the Pharisees. So when he was speaking to the masses and the crowds, he never warned them about Gehenna. So you can't say Jesus was warning anybody about hell. He was trying to speak to the people out of their own traditions, the teachers and the apostles. And Gehenna was a valley outside of Jerusalem that was known as a place of national judgment for Israel, because it was a place where they supposedly kept garbage, and a lot of the rejects of society lived homeless there or something. I mean, none of us really know. We're just going off of some of the legends or maybe earlier writings. But the point there is that the Israelites used to burn their children in fire to Moloch in this valley. And God said in Jeremiah that was like the most detestable and horrible thing, that never entered his mind that they should do that. And he set up Gehenna as, a place of remembrance or judgment for them. And so to think that God himself was criticizing the Jews for burning their children in fire.
And he would go ahead and he's like, oh, good idea, you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming up with
that. Was a great suggestion.
Oh my gosh. That's really trippy to realize that God was condemning the burning of somebody, and then we translated it, somehow turned it upside down.
Right.
Decided that's what God does.
Yeah, so there's several issues again that we could address, but let's try to focus in on just Gehenna, what its origin was. How much of that do you agree with from your research? And then I really want you to touch on the idea that Jews were sacrificing their children to Moloch. So let's go ahead and just start. Maybe just kind of lay out some of the history understanding of Gehenna and how much of that you agree with her characterization of it.
Sure. I think there is an element of truth to what Julie is here saying. The Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, as it is called in the Hebrew Old Testament, is indeed a valley right outside of Jerusalem. It's there to this day. You can go to hell right now if you want to. And it was indeed a place where Moloch and Baal worshipers sacrificed their children in fire to those false gods. But where it's a mistake, or where the mistake comes, is to assume that when Jesus uses the Greek word Gehenna, translated Gehenna, that what he is doing is referring to that valley specifically. See, by the time after the Old Testament was completed, Jews continued to develop traditional understandings of what the Hebrew Old Testament was saying. And one of the things that developed between the Old and New Testaments was the use of the word Gehenna, or at least the idea associated with it, the use of it to speak of eschatological or end times final punishment. Yeah. What they were doing was they were using the picture of the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, which in Jeremiah 7 is said to be, it said God promises to one day make it the Valley of Slaughter, where his enemies will be killed and their dead bodies will be eaten up by scavenging beasts and birds. That they use that picture of Gehenna, of the valley, as that kind of God dealing death, inflicting wrath by killing people. They use that as a picture of what awaits all the wicked. And so, for example, in the 3rd century collection of rabbinic teachings known as the Tosefta, they were collecting rabbinic traditions that extend back to the time of Christ and beyond. And here's just a quote from one of the tractates in that rabbinic collection called Tractate Sanhedrin. It says, "The Israelites who sinned with their bodies and Gentiles who sinned with their bodies go down to Gehenna and are judged there for 12 months. And after 12 months, their souls perish, their bodies are burned, Gehenna absorbs them, and they are turned into dirt." So it's a picture of death and annihilation. But they're not talking about the Valley of the Son of Hinnom right outside of Jerusalem. They're using the picture of that valley as a place where God would slay his enemies, as a picture of what God will do to his enemies in the future, enemies that include Gentiles as well. So when Jesus uses Gehenna, he's not talking about national judgment in that actual valley. He's talking about eschatological punishment, final punishment, end times punishment that Gentiles are included in as well, because that's what the term Gehenna had become associated with by the time that Jesus used it.
And I think this is a common motif of Jesus. I mean, Jesus is using things that are relatable and directly around the people that he's talking to. He's using fig trees. He's using landowners. He's using kings in all of his teachings as he's describing things. So it makes sense that he's going to use something that they're acutely aware of to illustrate a point about something that he is trying to communicate about the kingdom of God or about the afterlife or whatnot. So I think that's a really interesting point to kind of draw on, that even though it is a real place, that doesn't mean that it, Gehenna is a real place that, like you said, we could visit right now, that, had a reality to it that was local in our space and time. That doesn't mean that then it couldn't be something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like I might use the word Chernobyl to describe some nuclear disaster at some sort of place, without necessarily saying I'm talking about the Chernobyl we're all aware of, right? You're taking about a familiar event at a place in time, and then you're using that as a picture for of something else. That's not unusual to us. Now, as for this issue about God condemning these people for sacrificing their children to fire, as if that would somehow preclude him from killing people by fire, what I think Julie and probably Brenda are overlooking is the fact that human beings are not God's children by default, by birth, in the same sense that sons and daughters were being sacrificed by their parents to Moloch and Baal. Paul says in Ephesians 2:3, for example, that before believing, we were by nature children of wrath. Jesus tells the Jews in John 8:42 and 44 that the devil and not God is their father. Paul says in Romans 8, Galatians 4, Ephesians 1, and other places that we have, as believers, been adopted as children by God through Jesus. So, number one, it's important to recognize that we're not children of God in the same sense that Julie is assuming the word entails. The other thing to consider is that the problem with what these people were doing to Moloch and to Baal was not merely that they were killing people by fire. Right. The problem was that they were, number one, burning children to death. Right. Number two, they were doing so as sacrifices to false gods. And number three, they were doing so without God having told them to. But that doesn't preclude God from dealing out death as punishment, as retribution, and even death by fire. So he does, he rains down fire from heaven and kills the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. He floods either the whole world or the local area, depending upon how you understand the flood narrative, because they are wicked. And there it's by water, but it's still death. So what I would say is that, yes, we are not to sacrifice people to false gods by fire, especially children, of course. Right. But what doesn't follow from that is therefore God wouldn't kill people as the just punishment for their sin. And indeed, what do we see Jesus saying in John 3:16? God so loves the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish. Right. We have Paul saying in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. So the idea that death, whether by fire or some other means, is the right punishment for sin is not at all foreign or contradictory to what God is saying here in Jeremiah 7.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And one more verse that I thought you were going to add in there is Jesus even saying, don't fear the one that can just destroy your body, but fear the one that can destroy your body and soul. So even right there, even Jesus is very clear that there is justice in that sense, and we'll get to justice more here in a few minutes. But yeah,
that's right.
I did want to wrap that up. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the conversation that I had with Chris Date. If you're interested in checking out the whole conversation I had with Chris, you can go ahead and click here. As always, if you are dealing with deconstruction, I would invite you to subscribe. Thanks. We'll see you next time on Dealing with Deconstruction.